So we did this survey starting from February 10th and lasting until March 3rd. And there were lots of interesting and useful material that will be reviewed thoroughly. But this is a very preliminary result summary because there's so much material that we haven't been able to go through everything. Or we have gone through everything, but this is like the main points that we gathered from there. And there were respondents from 7 European cities and the region of Emilia-Romagna who participated in the survey. That was structured around the Tallinn Declaration principles, and there were, of course, I don't know who's speaking, but could you mute, please?
Mina ei kaotanud seda.
But cities have a long history of offering public services and reasonably long one even with digital services. And of course, like the service portfolio and the corresponding measurements have not been built based on the relatively recent Tallinn Declaration. So it's obvious that the responses and questions had some overlap. And this is not a problem, and we will adjust this in reporting. And so we might arrange the sort of subtitles and headings accordingly. And we will have a final deliverable that is due on the 30th of April this year, so quite soon. We start with digital interaction that was defined in the Tallinn Declaration as being the ability of citizens and businesses to interact digitally with their organizations. So it turns out that all the respondents and their organizations measure interaction with digital services, and typical measurements range from website analytics, so logging the amount of connections, sessions, unique users, time spent, most popular pages. Many use Google Analytics, but this was not explicitly mentioned in every single answer. And there was also usage and contact data about online and versus offline face-to-face services. So they were tracking and logging the amount of people using these services online and then these face-to-face services. And what was also tracked was feedback response time and quality, so whether the issue was resolved in a timely manner. And many of the respondents' organizations also had customer surveys to get the citizen perspective. So they might range from like very specific to very large surveys. And if there's a yearly survey, of course, it's not just about user centricity or maybe digital services. It might be about the public services as a whole, but then digital services are a subsection of that. And many of these service owners for specific services then provide also statistics and reports about the use of their service. Individual services may have major differences in what metrics are relevant to them and then thus being tracked and measured. So this is obvious, like for example, an example we got was for library services and then health services. There are very different metrics that are important related to them. I have put whenever I found some of these comments regarding what could be maybe done better or what is something that people are looking forward to developing in the future, or when I recognize that there was a clear lack of something, I put this room for improvement. So maybe there was this notion that there might be a better overview for tracking all digital interactions. So it might be very specific to certain services or to certain areas, and then there would be a need for this sort of like a giant dashboard or a tool that could combine many of these elements. And then there's also the accuracy and consistency across these different services, because some of it was also based on people reporting stuff. So that might be also like on an individual level what was reported, and then there might be differences in the kind of data that was available from different services. Next, we had accessibility and availability. So services shall be made more accessible, including findable and secure, and can be used by all in a non-discriminatory manner with appropriate assistance available upon need. I'm sorry, I usually speak quite fast, and I will go through these slides quite quickly. So if you have any questions, you can ask, you can stop me, or then ask later on. But I will try to go through them, and then we'll have time for discussion. So all organizations, yet again, measure the accessibility and availability of digital services. And this is also like the WCAG rules, they control to a large extent services that are sort of like public services that need to also be compliant to these rules. So usually accessibility is measured according to these rules before deploying a new digital service. There also might be audits and evaluations, both manual and automatic, and there might be external service providers that are doing these kinds of audits for services. And as for refinability, there are several tools that include grouping the services thematically. So you know that if you're looking at services related to healthcare or social services or funding or something, you can find them in a group that is built around that theme. And there might be service menus and search engines as well to help people find what they need. Website analytics, yet again, are a valuable tool because they may help in recognizing problematic situations and measuring availability. Although the recent legislation offering the possibility to opt out of tracking via cookies makes the data less accurate. And these are some of the tools that are being used, let's say, like Google Analytics, try to improve an A-checker. And as for room for improvement, a more accessible language was mentioned, meaning that people who are not speaking the official language as a first language might have problems if it's very, very difficult language is being used, and also other people with disabilities or other issues might be having problems. So this is thing that is also important to make sure that everybody who needs these services has the possibility to access them and the language is not too difficult. And also, as public services might not be available in non-official languages, it is important to make the official language version clear and understandable. Usability was in the Tallinn Declaration, it was not a separate entity on its own, but we separated as we felt that this is an important factor. So this is sort of clipped off the first or the previous one, but here we say that the principles of universal design have been applied to the setting up of the services and that the websites are simple to read and easy to understand. Again, all organizations measure the usability of digital services, and in many cases, usability experts are used to evaluate the services before deployment. And web analytics, yet again, are used to evaluate the usability of a website. For example, the percentage of users who have successfully used or completed a transaction. So you see that without outside help, they were able to do something. So this might mean that this is not entirely unusable, at least. And feedback from feedback channels and surveys is also used to evaluate usability, either at the end of the transaction itself or through larger yearly surveys. And in one case, Rotterdam had their own UX laboratory that uses a wide array of user experience and user testing methods. And they include like data analysis and text mining and accessibility data. So combining all these different methods to ensure a good usability. And as for room for improvement, there was recognition that like collecting more user feedback at the exact time when the service is used, and also about the service itself, and rather than maybe the or the experience rather than the service itself. Then there's digital delivery of public services. So it refers to the possibility of digital services when appropriate and upon the request of the user to be fully handled online, including the provision of any evidence required to obtain a right to fulfill obligations. I think here we notice that the percentage of services available digitally is not an official metric as such. So the data might be there. Of course, like cities know what they are providing, what kind of services, but in some cases also defining what constitutes a service might also be difficult. So this is information that might be readily available, but it's not used as a KPI, for instance. But the number of transactions per service and per day and per means of delivery is measured, as well as the contacts between online and offline. So you see that there are different ways of accessing a certain service, be it online or face-to-face or by phone. And these ratios are also tracked across these services. And several organizations, turns out, they use their own digital maturity indicators or indexes to describe digital services. So they might have an overview, an index of all the different services based on the indicator level, and then they see an overview of the digitalization shape of their organization. Historical data is used to some extent to make improvements and follow development. Protection of personal data and privacy and security. Handling of personal data respects the general data protection regulation and privacy requirements in the EU and national levels when applicable, informing citizens about the use and storage of their personal data and allowing citizens to access and ask for the correction and deletion. Authenticity of digital public services is secured and can be recognized in a clear and consistent manner. Obviously, we all know about GDPR, and there was a question about this, and we didn't really expect anybody to answer that they do not conform to GDPR regulations. Of course, this is very well handled in all organizations, and information is provided about the use of personal data, and there's the possibility to correct or delete personal data, and this is everything is as it should be. But obviously, like cities might have these legal obligations that they have to provide certain services, and there is data that cannot be erased in their systems. Usually it's like the link to relevant privacy and security information is provided wherever the digital services are accessed. So when there's a page where you're accessing a service, then there's the link also to view the appropriate information about privacy and security. Sometimes complex certificates and authentication can cause compatibility issues and problems for citizens. And also these authentication methods are often tied to individuals. So let's say, for instance, in Finland, we might have bank codes or this mobile certification that is tied to your mobile phone, and they are individuals, so they might not always work that well for businesses. And also this authentication and security is often controlled by legislation, and in many countries there are nationwide systems that are used. So for instance, Finland has one of these systems. I'm just saying Finland as an example because I have personal experience from that. Obviously, it is also worth remembering that not all services require strong authentication. So there's not always the need to know exactly that this is the person that is who they are claiming to be. So it's also possible to just create a login information and use a password rather than using a sort of a very secure two-factor authentication method or something like that. And what I found very interesting is also that Estonia offers a national ID card that can be used for authentication that can be applied for even by non-residents. So as the room for improvement states that there are some secure authentication methods that may only be available to citizens, which means that others who are not citizens might be left with no other option than using face-to-face services if they have no means of securely authenticating themselves. Then we come to the incentives for digital service use, which concern the removal of barriers related to the use of digital services, including by extending and promoting the benefits of, for example, higher confidence, speed, effectivity, and reduced cost to individuals who are able to use them. Nearly all the respondents provide incentives for digital service use, and there was a wide array of ways of doing this. Encouraging, it often happens through campaigns, and the results are monitored through web analytics. So this might be flyers, or it might be links posted somewhere, it might be personnel encouraging people to use online services. In some cases, there was also the possibility to benefit the user directly by waiving admin fees or lowering the transaction cost. So for instance, if you were used to getting a paper document mailed to your home and you would be able to get the same document digitally, then the cost reduction would be directly benefit you. Also, there is the possibility, like, you can provide public computers and Wi-Fi access to citizens so they don't need to have their own equipment, as well as guidance on the use of digital services. So there would be personnel who would then advise on how to get started and then also guide along the way if there are problems. And there were these digital agents, I think this was in Barcelona, who were helping people with lower digital skills. So they were specifically targeting neighborhoods and areas where people have lower digital skills so that they could educate people. Obviously, there was a very good incentive for people to use digital services that sort of emerged last spring. So the pandemic, unexpected increase in the use of digital services through that. So people are less eager to go and use face-to-face services. And I think in some places it might have also led to closures or like a limited offering in face-to-face services. So this has been the crash course for many. But obviously these are things that come after people have the necessary skills and necessary equipment to use these services. Also, there was an answer that sort of said that they were developing a model to calculate the impact of digital services, for example, in relation to time, cost, and CO2 emission savings. And this would be also communicated to citizens, showing them that by using this digital service, you could be saving this much resources. Part of the incentive is also in providing digital services that are better and easier to use. So if you make things more convenient for the user as well as the administration, of course, it's nicer to use good services. But as before, this is something that comes after people have the basic skills and basic equipment that is needed. So if these are lacking, there's, of course, none of this matters. Then reduction of administrative burden. So it should be reduced by optimizing and or creating digital processes and services where relevant and offering personalized and proactive services. Personalization wasn't measured to a large extent, and there were not that many proactive services either. And optimization measurements are often done during the design process or the phase to evaluate the reduction of admin burden. And methods that were being used, for example, were different lean methods to optimize these services. And then there's background monitoring and tools to see if the online process works as planned. And also there was measuring optimization by service integration, so whether public services are integrated to other systems. As for room for improvement, there was maybe room for improving both the offering and measuring of personalization and proactive services and alerts. So there was one example of like dental care appointments being alerted to children of certain ages. There might be these sort of health services that are offered at different intervals. So these might be proactive services that are available, but they were not mentioned, like health screening. Citizen engagement refers to the use of digital means for the empowerment of citizens and businesses to voice their views, to collect new ideas, involve citizens more in the creation of public services, and provide better digital services. All the organizations, again, they engage citizens. And common means to do so include surveys, feedback, usage and interaction data, engagement related to a specific activity, co-creation and service design workshops. And here we see a graph showing that we had like 7 respondents, and most of the options that we offered, so ideas for a new and improved service, feedback collection from citizens regarding existing services, testing of a new and improved digital service, and prototyping a new and improved digital service, they all got a lot of responses. So these are all very popular means of engaging citizens. The percentage of people who have been engaged is not usually evaluated. And I think this would be difficult because in many cases, the people also based on privacy and things, they are not identified. And it's difficult to know that this person is the same person that was participating in the other activity. And this is not something that also that maybe is necessary to track that we have engaged 12% of our population or something. But what is important maybe is to identify the groups that are left out. And this is common knowledge in many of the organizations, so they know who are the people they are not reaching. Also, offering means for digital participation attracts different user groups than traditional events where you go somewhere live and meet people. And also the pandemic has seen an increase in this kind of participation. So many more people are participating now because there's the opportunity to do things digitally. As for room for improvement, the people who are difficult to reach are young people, older people who might not have the digital skills also to participate in digital events, and then immigrants and language minorities. So many things are offered in the official languages, and then people who do not have a sufficient level of knowledge of that language might have problems in being engaged. And also to some extent valuing the citizen engagement within the organization. There's room for improvement. They might not apply to all the organizations, but in some they were identified. Redress mechanisms should be available online, and that citizens and businesses have access to complaint procedures online, while also in other available channels of their choice. About half the organizations that participated measure the complaint process, including the processing time and number of claims, and there's often a target time for processing these complaints or giving feedback to users, and that might be dependent on the complaint type also. But this is information that is often also communicated to the user themselves, and they are given the information that you're expected to get a reply from us within 5 days. And also some organizations use tracking or ticketing systems and to enable citizens to follow the processing of their complaint. There are lots of different ways to collect complaints from citizens. They might come through web forms or email, paper forms and letters, phone, face-to-face communication, and social media, but the official channel is usually in written format, where even online versions like web forms and email are okay. But like phone calls might not be the way to file an official complaint. And there was some maybe room for improvement for allowing the citizens to follow the complaint process online. And finally, measuring user centricity, which is not a talent declaration principle, but something we wanted to add. So we wanted to ask about existing definitions of user centricity and information on measurements, tools, and actions regarding the organization's approach to user centricity. Most of the respondents don't have an official definition for user centricity in their organization, while at the same time recognizing that user centricity is an integral part when designing and deploying new services. And so this is very important, but there might not be an official understanding or a common understanding of what constitutes user centricity. And measuring is done through surveys and feedback channels, testing and audits, website analytics, and according to the public service evaluation model. There might not be a specific report on user centricity, like centered around user centricity across all services, but it is a part of separate reports for individual services. And we received a lot of information and links from you to material, and this is something that we haven't had time to go through yet because there was so much other material, but we will look into them then afterwards and while we are doing the reporting. As for room for improvement, maybe a definition to ensure that everybody is on the same page about user centricity. So it might mean very different things to different people. And it might be helpful to have some kind of understanding of that, and also the motivating the information of user centricity to everyone within the organization. There are some conclusions. So usually legal responsibilities are handled very well. And there's a wide array of methods used ranging from website analytics to own UX laboratories. And user centricity is very valued and important to all organizations, but there are very different approaches. And as there are not these official definitions within organizations, it can mean very different things to different people. Website analytics seem to be a very important tool in tracking accessibility, usability, and digital interaction, and it seems plausible that this is the case because they offer a lot of information and collect it automatically. There is a lot of data, like for instance from the website analytics, but building a more comprehensive dashboard might give a better overview of the whole situation. And generally, the room for improvement might be in engaging certain groups and consistency in reporting. And this was what I had prepared for this preliminary result review. So if you have any questions or if you want to discuss anything, you can always contact me by email later on, but we can also open the discussion right now here in the meeting. If you want to go back to some of the topics, there's also the possibility to go back to them.